Japanese slavery experience, sir, is all part and parcel of the same puzzle. And therefore, sir, while on humanitarian grounds, we can obviously understand that there is a deep concern about that which has happened to George Floyd and others before him. We must also understand, sir, that it is part and parcel of the story that we have to tell in Barbados. And to, as the leader of the opposition quite rightly says, to dig deep into exploring where the continued weaknesses and deficiencies in our social structure lie. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, it is not only George Floyd. 12 days after him, it was another unarmed black man in a car park in the Wendy's, shot in the back by another white policeman. And 2 days ago, a Father's Day greeting was a noose for America's only black race car driver in his garage stall at the famous Talladega Speedway in Alabama, deep south. The thinking remains the same, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it is not a question of the atrocities being new or the atrocities being more frequent. The atrocities are captured by modern technology, and they are therefore something that is there for the whole world to see, and perhaps for those who are more conscious to become horrified about now. But the point of departure for us must be, sir, to understand that these things all bear witness to the message that was immortalized by Billie Holiday in 1939 when she wrote that which became the Time magazine Song of the Century, Strange Fruit Hanging from Southern Trees. And the younger members of this chamber who find a lot of time to go to Machel, Montana, but will not learn about those things at a Montana concert, need to know, sir, that southern trees bear strange fruit, that blood is to be found on the leaves and blood on the root, black bodies swinging in the breeze, strange fruit hanging from poplar trees. That sir, was the song that expressed the tortured social reality of the 1930s in the United States of America. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, it also gave birth to social investigation, which was being done by intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois, who, like the two speakers who spoke before me, sir, were prepared to approach this matter from a position of studied and steady, conservative schools of analysis. And there's nothing wrong with that, because quite frankly, that is where Dr. King was located. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that even as W.E. Du Bois was to witness the lynching of a man called Sam Hose, and he sought to intellectualize this, and he wrote a letter that was to be published in the newspaper, and he making his way to the newspaper, Mr. Speaker, to drop off his letter, to intellectualize that which horrified him, and he felt he could reason with the American society, the white supremacists of the South. He passed a shop where he saw Sam Hose's hand for sale. The charred hand, the charred knuckles of the black man that had just been cut down from a tree, where his body was burnt and then dismembered, and his limbs were now being offered for sale. And it was at that juncture, sir, that W.E.B. Du Bois came to understand that there was a social and psychological reality buried deep in the American system, buried deep in American culture and society, very similar to the vein of that which has been buried deep in Barbadian society, that says that there's a dispensability, an unessential nature to black people and the way in which they are treated. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to understand that Du Bois then made an observation that I think continues to haunt all of us to this day, that we as a black race are confronted with a double consciousness. On one hand, we are invited to accept the democracy in which we live. And we reach out for this ideal, we grasp it with both hands. Our people, and we all here are here as a part of that process, where people go every time an election is called and they vote in hope and in anticipation. And then the other side of that consciousness, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that they are greeted very often with disappointment and disillusionment. And they are visited with a denial of opportunity and a denial of equitable distribution of resources and a denial of those things which can empower them as a people, sir. And so for developmental purposes, yes, we all can hold hands and properly agonize and sympathize about that which is taking place in the United States today. But for humanitarian purposes, sir, that is one thing. But for developmental purposes, we have, sir, also to look at the lives in Barbados and to be sure that they are treated as though they fundamentally matter. And that is the point to which the Leader of the Opposition spoke, and I must confess, sir, that I agree with him wholeheartedly on that matter. It was a week ago to the day, sir, that I stood here in this house and I made the observation that there are certain people who invest in this country who have benefited from large concessions, sir, and that the way they have responded to labor, the way they respond to the people who sent me here, Mr. Speaker, and who sent you where you sit, is that they visit on them a 3-month contract, so that their relationship to employment is one of 3 months. And the question for those people, sir, is how do they eke out an existence? How do you go to the bank and negotiate a loan on the basis of the fact that you're working for 3 months? How, Mr. Speaker, sir, are you able to fix the house in which you live, to get the financing on the basis of that evidence that you're there for 3 months, Mr. Speaker, sir? It was in this house, not this physical location, but this parliament, a year ago, that I spoke, and I speak this way, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I begin with regard to the ministry that I am given the privilege and opportunity to lead. A year ago, I came to this parliament and explained the fact that in the Bridgetown port, there was a company that would have had the benefit of 85% of the business passing through that port in terms of human traffic, cruise, visitors to this island. 85%. But there are 300 taxi drivers in the Bridgetown port, Mr. Speaker, sir, who get 5% of the business. Do those lives not matter? And are these not the issues that we must now intervene in order to make sure that there's a distributive intervention in the interest of justice, that there's equality of opportunity, equality of access to resources, Mr. Speaker, sir? That is what the debate has to be about in Barbados. It is not a matter, sir, of waging war against anybody of any color. It is a matter, sir, of trying to make sure that we rectify imbalances that have haunted this society from time immemorial, as far back as the memory of man doth run. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important for me, I feel, as a member of this parliament, to speak this way in this house, because this house was the tool that was used to systematically oppress the working class people of Barbados, the black people of Barbados. All is the same. I heard a distinction being made by Leader of the Opposition as to whether it's race or class. Well, let me explain to the Leader of the Opposition, that is an artificial dichotomy. It is an artificial dichotomy. The reality of this thing is that the working class are the black people in Barbados. You will find one or two in one or two parishes of the island, but they represent a very small handful of exception. And we all know that skin color in Barbados gives opportunity to many things and denies opportunity equally to many people. In 1708, Mr. Speaker, this Parliament passed an act to prohibit inhabitants of Barbados from employing Negroes in selling or in bartering. It was in 1733, Mr. Speaker, sir, that this Parliament passed an act for the better governance of Negroes. That's what it is called. To prohibit them from huckstering, going after the poor people. The knee is on the throat of the poor people. Not satisfied, in 1749, this Parliament was used as a tool to pass an act to prevent Negroes from assembling in huckster shops. The working class. There were no white hucksters. None, Mr. Speaker, sir. 1774, this Parliament passed an act to prohibit Negroes from carrying goods and wares and merchandise, and to prohibit them from selling house to house around the island. Mr. Speaker, sir, the knee was placed in the neck of the working class people of Barbados, black people in Barbados, who were trying to eke out an economic existence. But Parliament was the tool used to stop them. And it goes on and on, Mr. Speaker, sir. 1811, all black vendors to be removed from Robert Street, Swan Street, Broad Street, and prohibited from vending in any form in those locations. This Parliament. And if it sounds familiar to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is because in your lifetime and mine, we have seen it, where the authorities use the same streets, the same exact locations in Bridgetown to hound working class people into submission, because there is a structure buried deep in the vein of this society that believes that there are certain locations where certain types of people can do business and others cannot. And that has to be wrestled to the ground. And sir, the reality is that we now have come to a point where the issue in Barbados, as the Prime Minister said during the course of the last election, is how we close the circle of enfranchisement and to give black people the economic opportunity that they have been denied historically. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of things that we have to look at. Immediately behind me is the Honourable Member for St. George South, who has been able to introduce for the first time trust loans in this country, because it gives the working class people, sir, it is commendable because it gives the working class people, sir, an opportunity to raise a little money to advance a business interest that they have without having to deal with this thing called collateral. You know, the bank is the hardest place to go and face anybody. Mr. Speaker, sir, in my own ministry, we, in an effort to respond to the challenge at the Bridgetown port, created the Barbados Alive Taxi, the taxi venture, which allows for taxi operators to be given the training and the access of opportunity in the same way that the big tour operators do. Unfortunately, COVID-19 come along and kill that as soon as it starts. But the COVID-19 will not be here forever, but we will get it going again. The importance of it is, sir, is to make sure that working class people get the same access to opportunity as others have benefited from. We also must go further, Mr. Speaker, sir. We must now speak the language in this country of making sure that there is a financial literacy across Barbados. And we all know, all of us in this house know, that in parts of our constituencies, and in some cases, the whole constituency virtually, there is a difficulty in understanding because of the class of the person. And in every instance, that class is also indexed to the race of the person, unfortunately. A difficulty in understanding what you are talking about and how certain things work when it comes to... Let me give you a few examples, sir. How many people in your constituency, if you go and tell them about crowdfunding today, will know what you're talking about? There's a lot of crowds in your constituency. But if you tell them about crowdfunding, you have to break it down and work with them to understand it. But there's another category of Barbados, sir, who not only understands it, but have been given the opportunity, sir, to study it and then to practice it and implement it. No equality. We have to face that reality. We got to face the reality, sir, that something as simple as share ownership is a challenge. And I can say in this house because I've had to deal with the issue with regard to the divestment of Harrison's Cave. I've had to deal with the issue with regard to the divestment of Brantley Adams International Airport, that even the trade union movement will tell you, Minister, I hear you, I get that, but the first thing I got to deal with is my workers have to be able to talk about getting a wage increase. And I said, but the wage increase is a 2 or 3% increase. Yes, Minister, and that may translate into $100, but that is what they understand. And I am saying, but there must be a better understanding and a comprehension of what it is to own shares, especially in an entity like Brantley Adams International Airport that will only see profit going forward and could only ever have been brought to the situation it is in now by a global pandemic. It is a challenge, sir, that has to be confronted. And again, the Honourable Member for St. George South is in the prime position because financial literacy in this country is part of that which his ministry the banner that his ministry must carry. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, other things. Writing a business proposal. Every young man in Barbados and young lady should be able to sit down and write a business proposal with confidence and know how to approach a financial house or credit union. How many can? How many go through school and have never seen in draft what a business proposal look like? Have never had a conversation with anybody as to how to put one together, Mr. Speaker, sir. So then, if that is the reality, how can we be saying that we treat all lives in this country as though they matter? And what about those who, by dint of hard labor, have done all that they could possibly do to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, look after their families, but now, later on in life, have started to experience hard times? They live in a house, a big wall house, a sprawling mansion with 3 bedrooms. Some got 4 bedrooms and 2 floors, Mr. Speaker, sir. But by virtue of old age or some incapacity, it starts to collapse around them. And they need to raise some resources. They ain't got no access to any other land. But around the world, people are talking the language of reverse mortgages, where your equity means something and you can take it back to the bank and leverage that. Because you have built that, you paid for it, 25 years past, you virtually pay off the whole mortgage. You now want to reverse it and say, give me some money that I can do a little bit more here in my life and then let my children, my offspring carry it. Unfortunately, my offspring are not in a position to help me today, but down the road, they're going to inherit this. Let them finish paying off for it. Not a bank in Barbados today in 2020 will do that, sir. Not one. So what happens in that mortgage market? What happens? And why is it that we are not taking the necessary steps to make sure that we close that circle of enfranchisement and empowerment so that black lives in this country can be advanced? Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we all know that one of the issues we have in Barbados is to find creative tools of making sure that people who do not have access to land, because that is what the colonialists did to us. They tell you, if you got land, you're going to get through. If you ain't got no land, you're going to struggle. And that is still the reality in law. So that you know and I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I think it was in 1880 that the Chancery Court consolidated the plantations. And as usual, all the way to some white people, some white families. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, reality is a lot of people in Barbados have no access to land. And to the extent that they get tenantry land, sir, the value of it is substantially less than in the heights and terraces. But, sir, many people in Barbados have assets. They've got motor mechanics, sir, with $100,000 in assets. The hoist, all the other things that they use to fix the vehicles, sir. Can't leverage one of those assets because we have not moved to that place where we can have a collateral registry, where people's movable assets that have value can be leveraged so that instead of having to rely on land in order to get a little collateral at a bank or a credit union, you can use your movable assets. The fisher folk in Barbados, in Paynes Bay, and in Fitz Village, and in Spikestown, Mr. Speaker, and in Oistins, who have assets, can't leverage them for nothing. So how do they build out a fleet? How do they move to the next level? And we, sir, content ourselves by saying that enough has been done and that the banking system is good. Well, ain't it good? Ain't no got to start to do work to empower the people in Barbados. Ain't no got to start to do work. And if they can't do the work, sir, then we have to make sure that we create through this parliament that has been the fetter and the obstacle to progress for centuries before we come along. This parliament must now be the tool to empower people whose ancestors were previously restricted and restrained. That's the point, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is to take the knee off of the necks financially of the people in this country. It ain't only about a white man there shoving, kneeling down in a man's neck and suffocating him. There is a different way that people have found in Barbados to suffocate the working class people in Barbados. And we got to stop that from happening too. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am saying to you respectfully that this use of movable and personal assets on collateral gives people who are not landowners an access to secured finance. And all of us in here know that the biggest challenge for small enterprise, small and medium enterprise, is how to access finance. But what small and medium enterprise often has is assets. But under our current system, sir, those assets can't be used to leverage capital. I don't want to stop, sir, without speaking to the access to technology. Because we must also understand that business facilitation is not about a multimillionaire from Europe coming here and saying he wants to invest $3.5 million in a venture. And how best you accommodate him. Business facilitation, sir, is about making sure that the coconut vendor who is standing alongside of the highway does not have only to rely on cash for his transaction for somebody to pass and rob him when the evening work done. So that, sir, we must now move to the technology which exists where if I go to the Bahamas, I am seeing people with a little thing around the neck and you take a credit card and you put it in front of the box, sir, and the money goes straight to that vendor's bank account. Get in a taxi and you don't pay the taxi man cash, he has a similar little thing, gadget, and you place a credit card in front of it, go straight to his account, Mr. Speaker, sir, using the technology to facilitate people who need to be facilitated because they are cash dependent. The water sport operator, cash dependent. All of them, Mr. Speaker, sir, and that's why I have the difficulty with the leader of the opposition a little bit, because I think he's slightly compromising on matters you don't have to compromise about. Let us be frank and faithful to the truth in Barbados. There are no white coconut vendors. There are no white people, sir, who are doing that. But they too must be facilitated. There are working class black men who must be facilitated, and their lives matter, Mr. Speaker, sir. And in all of these skill sets that we are pointing to, we all know people at the base of this society struggling against the greatest of odds, but needing not a handout, but a helping hand up. And the Parliament of Barbados must be the place, and the ministries of government must be the source of that assistance, in the same way that it was the source of resistance in previous years, Mr. Speaker, sir. And so therefore, I genuinely believe that there is much merit to be found in this debate. But this debate, sir, cannot only be seen in the narrow context of the unfortunate fate that was meted out to Brother George Floyd, or any of the hundreds, the countless hundreds, and probably thousands others across continental United States. The reality is that for us in Barbados, we know the symbols of oppression. We helped as a colony to export to the United States the structure that led to their oppression. There are people who, by virtue of the color of their skin at birth, continued to be at the bottom of a social pyramid. And there are people who, by virtue of the color of their skin at birth, continue to be at the top of the social pyramid. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is our task in 2020 to pull back the veil and let us now look at the substance of the society and to do the type of social interventions and engineering that is necessary to correct the wrongs of history and to secure the imbalances, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that generations of tomorrow, the sons and daughters of Negroes, sir, the sons and daughters of black people, let us be frank and faithful to the literature, the sons and daughters of those people who would have been told that they live in the nigger yard, must now be in a position to control the commanding heights of economy. And until we are able to see our offspring and our grandchildren making justifiable claims to commanding heights of the economy in Barbados, then the struggle must continue. And we are a long way from that, sir. A long, long way. We have to speak truthfully to each other about it. It is a conversation that the country must have faithfully. Because, sir, the reality is that it is not only our banking system, it is not only, sir, our financial system, it is not only, sir, our educational system, the structure of the way in which the insurance system works. I could go on and on if time would allow. The legal system, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I realize that time will not allow.
That is correct.
I noticed the intervention you're about to make, sir. The legal system. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, without wanting to wade too deeply into this other matter, I simply say this. I am now at an age and stage in life where I'm not interested in the optics. You could pull down 1,000 statues. It will fill nobody's belly. I am interested in filling people's bellies. I am interested in making sure that people have comfort when they sleep at night. That their children have satisfaction, that they can inherit something in the land of their birth, man. And Mr. Speaker, sir, until we come to that point, we are having an artificial debate. We're having an artificial debate. So let us come to the point where we are dealing with the substance. Psychologically, it may make things better. In terms of the optics, it may make people feel that there's been an achievement. That can be debated. I am neither for nor against, quite frankly. But my feeling is that the substance, we can't take our eye off that ball called substance. Do not take your eye off of the ball called substance. And the substance is, how do we economically empower the working class people of Barbados so that they can, and their sons and daughters can, be those people who are the guardians of the commanding heights of this country's economy. I am obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, there's a flash of a moment when one wakes up in the morning before you come to real consciousness, before you remember the events of the previous day or start to reflect or to plan. There's that moment when you open your eyes where you don't quite remember what has happened. And for anyone who has suffered any kind of life-changing loss, the morning after the events surrounding that loss cannot be described. Sir, this morning at 4:41 a.m., when I opened my eyes, I had one split second before I remembered the events of yesterday afternoon. So before I move on to the matters concerned with this resolution, I have to take a moment, sir, and I thank you for giving me the permission to call the names of Mr. Glenroy James, who passed yesterday, and in particular to honor and acknowledge a constituent of St. Michael South Central, a friend, a young man who I had become quite fond of, Mr. Christophe Griffith, who passed tragically in those events yesterday. I want to say that Christophe was one of these young people who is helping to, an example of one of these young people who's helping to lead the charge of revolution and transformation. Even in his quietness, he was fearless and had the kind of genteel but bold nature that we don't see much of nowadays. I want to offer condolences. I do offer condolences to his parents, to his siblings, to his entire family, to the community in Britons Hill, and all of South Central who miss him deeply, and we will continue to miss him deeply, to the journalism fraternity, to all of us, to Barbados. We lost someone who would have gone on to great things. Sir, I enter the discussion, the debate on this resolution concerned with Black Lives Matter to first acknowledge the death of George Floyd, who for 8 minutes and 46 seconds was the subject of an extrajudicial killing in the United States. And you know, when these things happen, we start a narrative often about the kind of person that the individual was, how many degrees they had, how well they had done for themselves, how much they represented the best parts of the black population. But the truth is, sir, that none of that matters. And were something like that to ever happen to me, don't talk about my degrees, Mr. Speaker, sir. I don't care what the individual was doing in the moment. I don't care what they were found doing. I don't care how upstanding or not upstanding you deem them to be. There has to be a strong statement that says, we as a nation, we as a civilization, do not allow extrajudicial killings, and as a state, do not sanction them in particular when the act is done to black people. So what you have evolving in the US and in countries around the world is state-sanctioned genocide of the black race. That is what is unfolding before our eyes. And the reason that this moment is so important is not because it has never happened before. It is because a people will not wait forever for justice. It is because that through centuries, after centuries of being shown over and over again that there's no justice for you in a system, people have to stand up and demand justice for themselves. There is always such a moment in any civilization that does not deliver justice to all, and that's what we're seeing happen. The reason it is not just happening in the US, the reason it is resonating around the world, is that we are all reflecting on how well or how poorly we are realizing the mandate of equality in all our countries, in all our regions, in all our communities. We are all reflecting on it. So for those who would say, why march for George Floyd? The march was not and is not just for George Floyd. It is for all of us to take that moment to examine whether we are doing the right thing for the people and the future generations of our society. And often, as happens when the equality discussion comes up, people will hold up tokens. People will say, as happens in the discussion on gender equality, but you have a woman as Prime Minister, but you have a woman as Governor General, but you have women here, there, and so on. And while it is important to acknowledge where strides have been made, it is also important to understand the systemic nature of the inequality which you are seeking to address. So that when individuals or even groups rise to a certain position, that is not enough. Unless you address the systemic issues that mean that you can't actually predict equal access to resources and to justice. Unless you can reasonably predict that it will happen in every case, you're not yet there. Similarly, there are people who will congratulate us for having the number of women that we have in this honorable place. There are people who will make the point that in Barbados we have black political power, as they would term it. But, sir, black political power for the few means nothing without black economic power for the many. And that is the business that we are here to complete. We've had black political power for decades, and we've started the path and the job and the project of black enfranchisement, especially under previous Barbados Labour Party administrations. I'm sure that colleagues to come will, as others have before me, make reference to that historical trajectory. So I need not do it here in my short intervention, sir. But we're not yet where we need to be. We have not yet completed the journey, and in many ways, we have to now get into the weeds of that project to understand what it means to really deliver economic and social and political enfranchisement. And sir, there is this notion that there's a black political class that has political power, and surely that is a representation of the fact that we have racial equality in this region. But sir, it's interesting how we cast this political power. And, you know, I actually reject that expression, political class, because it suggests to me that those of us who work and operate in this honorable place are somehow separate, somehow distinguished from the reality of living as Barbadians. And I find it a dangerous characterization, even though it's something that we say freely. I myself choose not to use it. I don't indict anyone for choosing to use it. But it perpetuates the notion, I think, that somehow politicians in Barbados are in some way to the manor born. I did not fall out of the sky yesterday, sir, and land here in this honorable chamber. And so I do not identify myself as a member of any political class. I asked the people of St. Michael South Central to send me here to do a job, to complete a project. I am working. And I think it's an important distinction that we have to make, because it sends the message that the task is to achieve membership in a class. That's not what the work that we're doing here is about. But there's also another association with political power, and I use that term very loosely because it's not as powerful as you think. There are those, not all, and perhaps, truthfully, not even most, who want us here to complete their own personal wealth agenda. That's what they see as the role of politics and political life. To complete their wealth agenda and no one else's. They see us merely as the administrative arm of their empire. And, you know, as the Honourable Member for St. James Central said before me, it is not about waging any war. But I think that we have to be true to ourselves in speaking to the realities that we have lived over the last few decades. And there are even those without empire who believe that we are here to follow their instructions merely because they believe They occupy a position of supremacy occasioned by their ethnicity, by their shade, by their status. Not all, not even most. But there is that sensibility that reflects itself in the mistrust that people often have for politicians. But sir, that is not why I asked people at St. Michael South Central to send me here to further anybody's wealth agenda. I'm not in that. But what I am concerned with, sir, is to making visible some of the issues that I myself confronted as a young woman growing up in Haggett Hall, going to football in Dash Valley, going to football in the Pine, walking to school to go to Belmont. We are real people who occupy this space, sir. And so this is not about taking on, my mother would say, picking up somebody's fire age. This is our experience. And I feel so pleased to be able to have the opportunity to address these issues with honesty because I feel the country is ready. So there's a notion that calling for greater police accountability means that you don't like the police. Let's be real. There's a notion that if you say, I want to know what happened to that young man who went into that police station on this date, come and tell me what happened. That if you support calls for transparency and investigations into accounts of police brutality, that you're anti-police. That could not be further from the truth. Sir, I think it is actually the opposite. I want the police to be trusted by citizens. Because if the police are trusted by citizens, it makes them more effective at their jobs. And therefore, it makes us all safer. So we need to have a police complaints authority that works, that responds in a timely way. We need to have a culture, a tradition, a practice of if there are questions around any kind of police activity, that those questions can be easily answered with records, with evidence, that we make this business transparent. Because, sir, suspicion and mistrust destroy societies. And while we, as we must, put important resources into making sure that the police have the resources that they require to do their work, one of the most important resources is a relationship with the community. Back in the early 90s, when we had some increases in violent crime in communities, part of the response had to do with officers developing relationships with their communities, coming to football practice, talking to the guys, talking to the young women, being able to have the community feel that we are on your side and we are working together to keep everybody safe. But it's not just about police, it's about all the institutions of the state. Sir, I as an MP and I as a Minister of Cabinet want us to use every single tool at our disposal to keep me accountable. Because I detest the notion that people who come to serve in political life cannot be trusted. I detest it. Every action, sir, that I have taken over the past 2 years, and that I will ever take, can and always will stand up to scrutiny. But it is not enough for me to know it or for me to say it. I have to show it. We have to show it. And so I promised that I was not going to delve too far into the policies and the programs and the things that we're doing. One of the reasons that we brought integrity and public life legislation first, and that we will complete whatever is required to make sure that people have that confidence, is that we, as a Barbados Labour Party administration, did not want to be associated with that previous decade that had tainted what a politician is. So I have no issue with accountability. I think accountability needs to attach to all state institutions, to all of us in here, to the police, and to anybody who has power over other people. Because that is the real equalizer. Accountability is the real equalizer in any power relationship. And so we have to make sure that it happens. It is also the reason, sir, that we have to take a closer look at how we fund democracy, how we make transparent issues of campaign finance. Because, sir, without transparency, we feed the notion that something dark is going on behind the curtain. And especially after that last decade of 2008 to 2018. So much unaccounted for, so much unexplained. So many examples we saw of wealth already created for a select few, and a concerted effort to keep that wealth concentrated in the hands of those few. After that, the country feels that the wealthy majority is controlling political action. And as long as the economic model of democracy, sir, is one based on large private donations, people are going to feel that way, whether it is true or not. The unfortunate thing about it is that it might cause us to paint all owners of capital with the same broad brush. It ascribes ignoble and nefarious motives to all, when that is simply not the case. There are those, sir, who support campaigns, and I acknowledge that these are not topics that we find comfortable, but if not now, when to speak to these issues. As the old people say, I don't have time put down. And I feel that the country is ready for some of these uncomfortable conversations. There are those who support campaigns, sir, that have no expectation of preference or privilege. In my limited experience, the overwhelming majority, in my experience, they want Barbados to work for all. But as long as we maintain a system of non-declared campaign donations, as long as we insist on decoupling state expenditure from democratic governance, people are going to wonder. Sir, there's a cost to democracy. And I believe that the state should be concerned with funding democracy, because you know why? If there are state appropriations that contribute to the electoral cycle, that have full transparency, then there's less of a suspicion. It is a contribution to accountability and to democracy. And it's not going to happen overnight. The trust that needs to be recreated is not going to happen overnight. And I know it is going to be a controversial issue, but we need to pull back the curtain. Because often, the curtain might be drawn, but there's nothing untoward happening behind it. We have to be willing, as the state, to bear the cost of real, transparent democracy. You know, 2020 has been a year unlike no other. We have seen a pandemic that has reset everything we thought or believed to be true. We have this moment where the entire world, the entire African nation, all over the world, and allies of African people are standing up to say no more. And I think, sir, that Barbados must have a race conversation. I think it has started. They weren't waiting for us. But in order for that conversation to be authentic, those who have privilege that relate to the color of their skin, that relate to the identity of their ancestors, that relate to their inheritance of wealth or status built on the backs of slaves, must recognize their privilege. Sir, I'm not going to enter into any persecution Olympics with anyone or any group in this country. Because the fact is that not everyone is operating from an equal position in this conversation. Some of us just first have to listen. That's all you are required to do right now. In cases where an entire country, an entire civilization is dealing with trauma of centuries, sometimes others of us just have to listen first. And if your country, men and women, in their overwhelming majority, tell you that a statue erected to serve to honor white supremacy disturbs them deeply in their souls, if they tell you that, why would you want to hold on to it? If you are an ally of the equality project with respect to race in your country, why would you want to hold on to it? This notion that it erases history, sir, I wake up with this skin every day in this country. And when I go to different parts of the world, I see the reaction that it gets. I see the reaction that it sometimes gets right here. I don't need a statue to remind me that Barbados was the site of the great slave experiment in this region. Here was where they wanted to create the perfect slave society and then the perfect post-colonial society. There is no possibility of forgetting that. The notion that tourists come from far and wide to look at a statue to white supremacy should make us feel ashamed. Because if we have nothing else, and I'm sure the member for St. James Central would certainly object, if we have nothing else in the way of a tourism product to offer to people, then something is desperately wrong. I don't know too many people who come here, too many guests of mine who say they want to come to Barbados and, oh my goodness, I want to see that gentleman in Hero Square. I've always dreamed of seeing him. The notion that that kind of homage to white supremacy can be equated with historical buildings that still serve a function today, that can be equated with institutions of faith or centers of worship, is a false equivalency. And I promised myself that I was not going to turn my intervention into this particular discussion. But I want to be able to speak to it once only and set it aside. I agree with the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, with the Prime Minister, that the country has to come to terms with what it wants to do. And that we will be guided. That is the model of governance in which I believe. But equally, I cannot understand, just as I cannot understand how you can grow up in a majority black country, 95, 96, 97% black, for your entire life as a white person in this country, and somehow neither you nor your children nor your children's children could count one black friend. And when I use the word apartheid, people think that it is melodramatic. I think that we have to be willing to speak truth to power on these issues. It doesn't mean anybody's making enemies. It doesn't mean that we don't all have non-black associates who are allies. There are many. But we need to have the conversation. Sir, we all know of that very popular song by Bob Marley, War. And in War, he says, we Africans will fight. Now, Emperor Selassie in his speech had said, we Africans will fight if necessary. Bob Marley said in his song, we Africans will fight. We find it necessary. There's a world of difference there. And we know we shall win as we are confident in the victory of good over evil. Like Bob Marley's entire discography, I know every word by heart. Except, sir, I am not as confident in the victory of good over evil. Evil wins all the time. Especially when good women and men do nothing. So I ask the people of St. Michael's South Central for their support in coming to this place, sir, to do something. And if you look all through the manifesto of this Barbados Labour Party government, you will see the ways that we committed to do something. I don't have the time, and I don't even wish to go through all of those. I count on my colleagues in this place to help put that thesis. But I do have to mention a few that I feel very strongly about. The truth is that where I sit, where I have the privilege to sit in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, it really is a privilege for me, because it is a place in which I can be personally associated with the project of completing economic enfranchisement for my generation and for generations to come. I would not have come here if I did not think that these men and women in this chamber were equal to that task and would deliver on that mandate. Because I don't have any aspirations to be in any political class, I don't even know what that is. Sir, the Equity for All Home program is one of the ways of completing what was started under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. We still have some work to do in being able to give people title to their land. But in the meantime, we are being outnumbered, sir, by the sheer volume of people who just need affordable housing. And the Equity for All program, sir, is the way in which we provide access to affordable home ownership. 1,400 homes in the first instance. And once we are able to roll that out, we will work to recapitalize to get to 3,000. Because while we say that we've completed the work of putting the things in place to give people a piece of the rock, and now we're focusing on a piece of the action, turns out that we still have to do the work of giving people access to a piece of the rock while we give them access to a piece of the action. We can walk and chew gum. We can consider the place of a statue to white supremacy and whether it should be there or not, and we can continue with our enfranchisement agenda. It is not either or. They're all important projects. The planning obligations that are now a part, sir, of the planning and development legislation is also a part of that enfranchisement and that equalization of wealth and opportunity. Because it gives us the wherewithal, if a development is standing to benefit from the country's patrimony, from the sun and the sea and the sand and the healthful environment and the air and the ambiance, it gives us the wherewithal for those developers to be able to give back, to balance the impact of that development by also having another social impact in providing access to land for the housing program that we are embarking on and for other projects. But planning obligations are not just about land. They also provide us for ways, and we've started already with an important hotel development in the city. It also provides us with ways to give people access to an equity stake in the developments, to have people invest so that we can get on with this business of creating intergenerational wealth. It is not enough, we have seen it, to make a couple of people in a home, in a household, to give them jobs, to make them financially independent. It is not enough, because what will happen? Dependency ratios tell us that if there are 5 or 7 or 10 people depending on that income, those people are going to become poor again. Unless you create the wherewithal for people to invest, to create wealth that will stand up for generations of their children, that will really make them economically secure, then we're not doing anything. Sir, we talk about renewable energy and medicinal cannabis projects having to have a certain minimum investment from local business and local operators. And I want to emphasize that we're not in the business of giving people access to grow a bulk commodity. We're not even in the business of focusing on the growing of the bulk commodity. We want to give people access to the companies that will be generated from the value-added production in the medicinal cannabis industry. That is the enfranchisement content of that. And I realize that there must then be a conversation, once we have completed that process of where we place cannabis in the law. I accept that there then must be a conversation that addresses those people who are now sitting in a particular place as the result of a custodial sentence associated with possession of that same cannabis. I accept that that is a conversation that the country wants us to have. It is a valid conversation. Sir, we came here to debate a bill last week, I believe it was, the BOSS scheme. And one of the reasons that we found it important is that it is to give us access to $100 million in capital expenditure to enable us, yes, to get people employed, enable us, yes, to get economic activity, but also to make sure that this scheme is also a part of the economic enfranchisement project. Sir, we found that while we have made flexible the procurement legislation, the access to procurement, we want small businesses to be formed, we want people to start companies and to have access to government procurement. But as was said earlier, this is not always the only gap in people's access. There are all kinds of gaps. There are all kinds of structural reasons why people find that they cannot successfully have access to this procurement. And we know that one of these has to do with the information that people have at their disposal. Simple things. How do you bid for a contract? How do you put together a successful bid? How do you put your company in the place to be able to take a part of this? And if we continue to say, well, it's open for all, like open the door. What happened that you ain't walk through? Look out the door, you realize that the door is open, but somebody's knee is on that person's neck.
You all remember has 2 more minutes.
We have to get down in the weeds, sir, and look at the real reasons why people do not have access. And that's one of the reasons why we are starting a program to actually do a bit of that hand-holding, to find small contractors in their communities and to make sure they have the wherewithal to access these resources. Sir, in my final moments, I will say only this. I realize that this topic is controversial. I realize that it is sensitive. But I could not continue to be who I am, to represent the people who sent me here, if I did not say these things. These things did not become true because I walked in here. For me, these things have always been true. This has been my life. This is the life of the people of St. Michael South Central and many others. And so I support this resolution. I welcome wholeheartedly the conversation. It is time, and it is an opportunity that we will not soon get again to bring about real equality in this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:05.
Until the question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 5 minutes after 2. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me taking the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 5 minutes after 2.